What makes a John Singer Sargent painting feel like a Sargent? I wanted to find out. This is the first in my Masters Reimagined series where I take inspiration from legendary artists and try to capture their style, while still making it my own. For this episode, I challenged myself to paint a portrait in the spirit of John Singer Sargent, exploring what makes his work so distinct. But along the way, I hit a wall: procrastination. It's not something I usually struggle with, yet this time I did. And that hesitation told me something important about the process. To really understand Sargent, I try to go deep. I gathered a stack of books from the library, trying to figure out what made his work his. Let me share what I discovered diving into these fascinating books about Sargent. Each one reveals something different about his artistry. This first one really surprised me. While we usually think of Sargent's elegant society portraits, this book shows his work during World War I at the end. The contrast is striking. Instead of his characteristic loose, confident brushstrokes, we see a more somber documentary style. It's almost like looking at work from a different artist entirely. Perfect if you want to understand how versatile Sargent really was. Now, this one's a treat for watercolor enthusiasts. It focuses on his time in Italy, and you can really see how the Mediterranean light influenced his work. His watercolors here are just absolutely luminous. The way he captured light bouncing off Venice's canals or the sun-baked walls of Florence. It's very masterful. This is your go-to if you want to study his watercolor techniques. This one's actually a broader art history book, but it has this fascinating section about Sargent's infamous Madame X portrait. It tells how this single painting pretty much ruined his Paris career. The original version showed one strap of her dress falling off her shoulder, which caused such a scandal that Sargent had to repaint it. He later called it one of the best things I have done. Incredible how one small detail could cause such controversy, but I guess it was just back in those days. This book is absolute gold for artists. Look at these preliminary studies and underpaintings. You can actually see his process, how he built up his paintings layer by layer. If you're interested in Sargent's techniques and working methods, this is the book you need. And this is my favorite. It's basically a chronological encyclopedia almost of Sargent's life and work. The reproductions are huge, which makes it perfect for studying his brushwork. It also includes his preparatory sketches, which really show how much work went into making his paintings look so effortless. Looking through these books, you really start to understand that Sargent wasn't just a portrait painter. He was an artist who constantly pushed himself to evolve and experiment. His war paintings, his watercolors, his portraits, they're all different facets of the same brilliant mind. One thing that stood out, he was basically a 5-star nomad. Born in America but raised across Europe, Sargent lived a privileged life thanks to his mother's deep appreciation for the arts. He trained in France, and his early work like Madame X was bold, striking, and at the time scandalous, like I said. That backlash sent him to England, where he rebuilt his career painting high society portraits. Beyond his portraits, I also noticed something I hadn't really thought about before: his war scenes. I'd always associated him with elegant, effortless brushwork, but there was another side to his artistry: raw, emotional storytelling. I selected 4 of his paintings to study from that I absolutely loved. I love his bold strokes, but I quickly realized that my paper just didn't handle water the same way. That was my first big takeaway. His materials mattered. Here's what I learned from this phase. Okay, so let me share with you what quickly happened. So here are the studies that I did, kind of like warm-ups. So I've done the Lady Agnew. Is that how I'm not so sure, but yes, I did get the overall feel of it, but you just see, like with watercolor, it just doesn't leave those strokes. This was gouache, actually. It wasn't watercolor. This is watercolor, but it's still very soft. And this was only done with watercolor. I went over with some gouache for the flowers, but they didn't quite work because you have to go really thick. So I have to do, I'm just still getting the hang of gouache. So, and Dr. Posy, I love the red. I did some layering as well over the top of his clothes. And I did some strokes using watercolor. But still, yeah, I just feel like it doesn't have that punch that I want. And Madame X, eventually I used black gouache for her dress to get that matte feel, because just with watercolor, it just didn't look opaque enough. And the background is kind of nice, but my intentions are to bring what I love about my own work, which often is watercolor because that's the medium I typically use. But I do want to incorporate what I love about him. And what I do love about his work with Dr. Posy, let's say, is the use of red. I just love that red. It's so sexual. The hands of Dr. Posy is what I particularly like, where it's very sensual. So I like that. But with hands, I'm still in the learning process, so I probably wouldn't depict that. And then second, for Madame X, I just love those gold, that slight touch of paint that he's using, but in the viewer's eyes, we just see what it is. Like, she has a tiara at the top. She has her straps that are in gold, I believe, some kind of like maybe Swarovskis, or I don't know, but they are amazing. So I like that feel. Carnation, Lily Rose, I just love the use of his color. Like, I use quinacridone coral for this, as well as transparent pearl orange. And I just love that intenseness. And what makes it intense, I didn't quite get it right here, but what makes it intense, I believe, is the dark background, the earthy dark background he uses around it, with that very glow of the lantern, which makes it so pretty. And almost these like flowers like hanging around, like floating in the air, I absolutely adore. And for Lady Agnew, is that how I say it? I love the color that he uses. I typically am drawn to like lavender color, like lilacs, and all those like kind of opaque purples. I just love those, and the blues. So I do love the color palette, so I'm very torn with what I'm going to do. But eventually, I think now is the time to kind of do a study of another one of John Singer Sargent, where I am going to use gouache. Because basically, if I water it down, it's going to do a lovely background, a warm background, and then I'm going to paint his portrait. Eventually, I think I will use oil pastels over gouache. This is going to be a completely like new experiment for me. I've never done it. I don't know how it's going to turn out. And I'm going to be using this Emily Hughes Craftmo brushes, which I've been using here and there, but I haven't fully used it quite. So I'll be using that, and we'll see how it goes. I have absolutely no idea how it's going to turn out. But what I am planning to do at the end, so I've done my sketch here, I'm going to put a layer of warm wash first with gouache, leave it, and then start adding in the colors, build up the layers, and eventually use the oil pastels. And because oil pastels, like, I've never worked with it, I'm not too sure, but from looking at like other YouTube videos, the details, I just love adding those small details in the eyes, and it's gonna be, I think, quite difficult for me to do that, but I am going to maybe use some oil painting brushes, or even these Emily Hughes like really thin pointed rounds, to get into those really small places with safflower oil. I'm not too sure how that'll work, but I try to stay away from linseed oil because it can yellow over time, and I want to use quite a lot of white as well. So we'll see how that goes, and yeah, let's dive into it. So I've tried the oil pastels over the gouache and it worked so far. What I can say though was that once I start using the safflower oil, I mean it did spread, but it just felt like that time when you're using turpentine in oil for the background, so it becomes very thin and there's not much that you can see. So I don't know if I'll use that necessarily, because what I wanted around the clothes was those like really thick brush strokes, and using the safflower oil just like kind of made it very thin and it didn't give that like texture. So I think I'll have to create those like bold oil pastels over gouache worked. When I did use the safflower oil, I realized that it became very thin, almost like that feeling if you've done oil painting. It's like when you're using turpentine and going for the background, like a very, basically like a wash in watercolor. So when I used it around the clothes, it didn't create those really strong brush strokes. So for those, I think I have to lean more in towards using gouache instead of the oil pastels. And when I do go in with the oil pastels, it'll be those really slight touches. Like for here, the mustache, I think it kind of worked, as well as it gave more kind of luminous feel to the red that's in his clothes. So I think for those kind of slight touches, using stills kind of works. And for the background, I really liked it. I kind of smudged it with my hands. I think using the hands works better. I just felt that way rather than using the safflower oil. It works, but still, I just felt like that was better using my hands. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not really happy with the color choices around this area with the green, but it is what it is. I think I just have to learn what colors tend to look like what when you're using oil pastels. And this is pretty much my first time using it with portraits. So yeah, that was pretty fun. Okay, so off to the final stage, the last painting. Now, for those that you're really against AI, I understand. Me too. I don't like the fact that it's using like the hard work of all artists out there and then combining them and then like reading all the data and so forth. But what I think I have to put out there is that there's no really stopping all of this. It's gonna carry on. So I want to be in control of what I can do, and to know that it's still going to happen regardless of how much I hate it or like it or whatever feelings that I have towards it, it's going to happen. When I want to add something or I want to create a reference photo that I want to put in some details that's not really there, I'll use it. So I'll show you how I use it roughly. All my Masters portrait series is going to be of the Masters. I'm going to create like a portrait of them using the style that I specifically like for those artists, and then I'll combine it with what I love personally with my own style. I do like these like muted kind of earthy tones in his artworks, but I really love Dr. Puzzy at Home, that painting, the red. I like reading people's minds and what they might be thinking, but with John Singer Sargent, I think he has a very like sexual kind of desire. I mean, all of us do, right? But I have this feeling that he really wanted to be like Dr. Posey. Like that's him. Basically, it might be even his portrait, self-portrait. So here I am. I want to use red for John Singer Sargent's clothes. I know it's not him really, but I want to create a portrait of him in red. And the second thing I want to do is I want to create like a bit of maybe on the cuffs, like a gold element of like jewelry that he's wearing, because the paintings that I really love, they usually have that element of like a slight touch, but you could tell that it's a gold, but when you look closely, it's just like a brush stroke, a very subtle brush stroke. So I'm going to add those two, and to add those two, I want to use the help of an AI to create
those two elements into it. And I mean, at the end of the day, you can say, hey, create it in your own head, but I'm not to that level, so I need help. And this is how AI kind of helps me, unfortunately. So if you're against AI, then I'm sorry to see you go, but it's just, I want to put it out there that I do use it to help me out, and that's just my choice.
So in Photoshop, I used the lasso tool to select the suit, and then I used generative fill and then filled it in, saying I wanted a red suit with some accessories like, I forgot what you call these, but yeah, and there was one that I didn't want, so I selected the accessory on the right, the button on the right, and said, hey, just delete this one, and it did. And then next, I thought the bow tie was not quite right for him, so I just basically selected that whole area and then deleted what was there, erasing that bit and going back to what John Singer Sargent originally was wearing. And I thought that just looked fine, actually. So that's pretty much it. With my reference, I started painting first the wash. I used Van Dyke Brown Watercolor and Ultramarine Finest Gouache from Schmincke. First layer of the portrait was in watercolor. Then I stopped for 3 days.
I've painted this first layer on Friday, and I could have painted on Sunday. I didn't. I could have painted it on Monday. I didn't. I could have painted it today on Tuesday. I didn't. And I've been procrastinating, and I knew I was running away from it. I was doing some other things that needs to be done, but I was running away, and I knew I was, and I put it off. The reason why I want to finish this painting is of John Singer Sargent is because this is going to be number 1 of my series, one of the missions of this year, which is to paint Masters Reimagined portraits. And this was going to be the first one because he's born in January, and why not, right? To start off this whole series with John Singer Sargent. And I kind of reflected on the reason why I haven't been painting and why I put it off. And to simplify it, I'm scared. Number 1, I'm kind of scared of finishing it because of the fact that it doesn't feel like it's my own thing. I did used to use these warm colors for the background painting when I used to do oil painting, but using that for watercolor is something quite new for me. So it doesn't feel as nice, it doesn't feel like a safe place for me. So I'm kind of struggling there to see the good part of it. And on top of that, it's just not my style, right? But I am trying to look at the good part of it. Like, I love the granulations that happening here in the red. I used the Daniel Smith Primatech series garnet for his jacket, and that I do love. So I'm trying to see the good in it, and that if I push through, this can become a pretty painting. But it's just hard because this is a whole new process that I'm experimenting with. Using watercolor is normal, but not doing like underpainting with the warm tones like browns, like Van Dyke Brown I've used here. I'm not used to using gouache as much. I have done it with my few paintings and I absolutely love them, but they're more like it's specific areas I've used it. And number 3, I'll be using oil pastels for like very strong brush strokes, you know, those vivid kind of strokes that John Singer Sargent's works have a lot of. So I'm just scared at the end of the day, and I just wanted to share this process because this is what it's like. It's not like you know, those Instagram reels where it just feels like magic, like wow, they're so good at it. I just feel like there's always this struggle within the creative process, and I just wanted to be authentic with how it's going. So I hope you enjoy this, and as my son and my husband will be back home soon, I'll have to prep food. I don't have time, this is not procrastination, but I'll be working on it definitely tomorrow. And by the end of the month, January 31st, I really want to publish this video of this whole process out there. So wish me luck, and yeah, ciao.
Eventually, I told myself, it's okay if I mess this up. I've already learned so much from the process. That was enough to push me forward. I deepened the background, added more layers of watercolor to the face and clothes, then worked in gouache. I got scared when it got too dark, but I kept going. Finally, I brought in the oil pastels for those finishing touches. So at the end, did I capture Sargent? Not exactly, but that's kind of the point. Sargent's watercolor paintings don't even look like Sargent the way his oils do, and that was an important realization. Sometimes we chase a style so much that we miss the essence of what makes an artist's work powerful. For me, this project wasn't about perfect imitation. It was about absorbing what I love from Sargent. His confident brushwork, his bold decisions, and seeing how that translates through my materials and perspective. I'm not 100% happy with the outcome, but that's okay. I pushed my limits and I learned a lot. This is just the beginning of my Masters Reimagined series. One artist down, and many more to go. So who should I explore next? Let me know in the comments. Hope this inspires you to experiment as well. Till next time, keep creating. Bye bye.